In 17th century Virginia, lawmakers passed an act forbidding people from burning down their own houses. Not because of fires, because people were torching their cabins on purpose, just to rake the nails out of the ashes. That's how precious this little thing once was. The very thing you now toss into a cart for pennies. And this story begins 5,000 years ago. The first nails weren't iron at all. Around 3,000 years before our era, the ancient Egyptians and Sumerians shaped small pins from copper and bronze. The metal was soft and easy to work, yet hard enough to do the one thing that mattered: hold two pieces of wood together. It looked unremarkable, but it was a breakthrough. Before the nail, you built by lashing beams with rope, by wedging wood into wood, or by driving in wooden pegs. Every single joint demanded patience and precision. A simple copper nail made all of that easy. The Egyptians used them to build boats on the Nile. Phoenician trading ships, held together with copper nails, carried goods across the entire Mediterranean. And copper had one extra advantage. It didn't rust when it met salt water. But the real revolution arrived with iron. Somewhere between 1200 and 800 years before our era, smiths discovered that iron was harder, tougher, and cheaper than bronze. An iron nail could bear loads of copper one could never even dream of. And it was the Romans who turned this simple thing into an industry. Every major legionary fortress had its own workshop, a forge where hundreds of nails were hammered out, day after day. To the Romans, the nail was what the screw is to a modern engineer, the foundation of everything. They built with nails: bridges, forts, marching camps, warships, and aqueducts. The legions needed nails in quantities that are hard to even picture. Every new conquered territory meant new fortresses, and every fortress devoured tons of iron. And here we reach one of the strangest archaeological stories ever told. The year is 87 of our era in Scotland. The fortress of Inchtuthil, the only legionary fortress ever built on Scottish soil. But wait, this story hides a secret the Romans themselves never saw coming. The fortress had been razed only a few years earlier, under orders of the governor Gnaeus Julius Agricola, who was campaigning against the Caledonian tribes. But politics back in Rome shifted. The legions were pulled out. The fortress had to be abandoned. The Romans faced a problem. Leaving tons of iron behind would mean the local tribes melted it down into weapons. They couldn't carry it all. It was simply too heavy for a march. So they made a decision that would survive for nearly 2,000 years. They dug a 12-foot pit beneath the workshop floor end, buried 875,400 nails inside it. 7 tons of iron, all in one place. They filled it in, levelled the ground, and marched away. For the next 19 centuries, nobody had the faintest idea what lay beneath the soil. In 1961, archaeologists finally uncovered the hoard. The nails, from tiny ones barely 2 inches long to massive 16-inch spikes, were in astonishingly good condition. Sam went to museums around the world. The rest were sold to collectors at 5 shillings apiece. But for more than 1,000 years after Rome fell, the nail stayed a luxury. Every single one had to be forged by hand. A smith would heat an iron bar, hammer out the shank, flatten the head, and sharpen the point. One nail, dozens of hammer blows. In medieval England there was even a dedicated trade, the nailer. Whole families, children included, worked the forges from dawn until dusk. A skilled craftsman might hammer out 12 kilograms of nails in a day, maybe 2,000 of them. Sounds like a lot? It still wasn't enough for a single house. And that's exactly why nails were so valuable. In the American colonies, they served as actual currency. In Virginia in 1645, lawmakers passed an act forbidding people from burning down houses just to recover the nails. The very fact that a law was needed tells you everything about their worth. The breakthrough came at the end of the 18th century. In 1795, an American named Jacob Perkins patented one of the first nail-cutting machines. Instead of forging each nail one by one, the machine sliced them straight from flat sheets of iron, one after another. The results were staggering. By hand, a smith turned out a dozen kilograms of nails a day. A worker at the machine, hundreds of kilograms. The jump in output was many times over. The price of nails fell so sharply that ordinary families could finally afford to build wooden homes. But the revolution wasn't over. In the second half of the 19th century came the wire nail, made not from a flat sheet, but from a spool of steel wire. The machine cut the right length, formed the point, and flattened the head, all in a fraction of a second. Wire nails, first called points de Paris, the Paris pins, took over the market at a dizzying speed. In 1886, they made up barely 10% of American production. 6 years later, they had overtaken cut nails. And by 1913, 90% of the market. Today, the world makes more than 200 billion nails every year. A round shank, a flat head, a steel shine, they all look exactly the same. But the principle hasn't changed one bit since those Egyptian pins of copper. Drive it in, join, hold. So the next time you pick up a nail, that cheap, mass-produced, forgettable little piece of steel, think of the Egyptians who lashed their boats with it, of the Romans who buried almost 1 million of them so they'd never fall into enemy hands, of the smiths who spent their whole lives at the hammer, and of the machine that in a single moment put building within reach of the entire world. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story of an object you think you know, but don't know at all. Because the nail is proof that the biggest changes in history aren't always the spectacular ones. Sometimes all it takes is a sliver of metal with a sharp end, and the whole world holds together.